Hi, everybody. This is Gaynor Meilke, and welcome to Move the Needle YouTube series. And my co-host is John Higgins from John Higgins Advisory, and I'm from Charisma Inc. And the purpose of Moving the Needle is to help your firm really be able to optimize digital transformation in a number of different ways. And today we have a very special guest, Luke Kiely from iComply, who is probably one of the top cybersecurity experts that you will meet in the accounting sector for a number of reasons. So I'll let John introduce himself and then Luke as well, and you'll see why this conversation is going to be so important for firms today.
Okay, well, thanks, Gaynor. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Gaynor mentioned, I'm John and with Higgins Advisory. And what I do is I've been a CPA in the CPA profession for over 40 years now. But for virtually all those 40 years, I've been focused on helping CPAs to understand and apply emerging technologies. And, of course, the big topic these days is all about AI and all the different implications of that. And so very excited today to have with us Luke Kiely, because Luke's going to tell us all about who he is and what he does. And then we'll have our conversation about how you and your firms can be taking the appropriate steps relative to security, data security, and other issues relative to using AI. So Luke, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, sorry. There we are. Thank you. Yeah. So look, this is it's an exciting topic. So I'm ex-law enforcement. I was law enforcement for 13 years. Did a variety of different of investigative roles. Most notably, it was the creation of the cybercrime unit for the force that I worked for. I transitioned out of the police about nearly 7 years ago now into the private sector and have covered a lot of different roles from security operations, but most notably, I'm now working around software and technology in the finance and technology space. And iComply has evolved as a result of a genuine need to fill a gap where I feel the accountants need more knowledge, advice, and guidance on managing technology to make their firm secure and successful.
And I know, Luke, you and I have had a lot of conversations just about that topic and how, I know we're not really going to deep dive into the WISP today, but just how the WISP plays a role, but it's just really a piece of paper and you need to put a cybersecurity plan into action. And I think one of the biggest risks for firms is what they don't know, right? It's like everything, we all have blind spots, and none of us, except people who decide they want a career in cybersecurity, go to school to learn everything. And there's new threats emerging every day and new technologies, which we're going to dive into the AI piece in just a minute. It's how do you wrap your arms around everything for a firm? And I think what makes Luke really unique in having this discussion is his window into actually working on cyber crimes as well. So Luke knows what we're really up against as opposed to just kind of reading about all the hacked malware and bad actors who are going to try to take down your accounting firm. But as we all know, one of the greatest risks can sometimes be inside of a firm, and whether that's ignorance or actual, you I don't want to say negligence, or people who are just trying to do bad things that you may not expect inside of a firm. When it comes to using technology and AI in particular, I thought what Luke had mentioned to John and I about AI user roles is something that we should definitely be talking about. So that's what we're going to talk about on this episode. And I know, John, that was kind of something that you and I hadn't really talked about. How do you bucket the way that you're using AI in a firm? So I think we can let Luke take it away, just to kind of give us a high level, and then we'll kind of chime in and dive a little bit deeper.
Sure thing. I'm going to probably start off with just talking about the WISP for a second because it actually does set the tone about what we're about to talk about. Now, one of the fundamental requirements around having, if you're an accountant, you're more than likely going to need to adhere to the FTC safeguards rule. And that says very specifically not that you need an information security plan, you need an information security program. And there's a big difference between a plan and a program. Plan is effectively just a document that says how you do it. The program is what you do to actually secure yourself. As part of that, it actually asks you to have roles and responsibilities. And so one of the most distinct roles that you are going to have is a qualified individual. That qualified individual is the person that is responsible for your firm in running the information security program. There's a big burden in that, and typically it's going to be the firm owner. It doesn't have to be. It can be somebody else. It could be the cleaner. As long as they're equipped and have got real world knowledge experience to run it, absolutely fine. But in any information security program, you need to be clearly defining the roles and responsibilities for other people in the business. What are the roles and responsibilities of the board? What about your partners, your investors, your third-party suppliers, your employees? Everybody has a role in your firm. And then it becomes even more nuanced than that, is that the roles really depends on the technology, because you could potentially have a large CRM or tax system or software that spans multiple roles and responsibilities. You could have the business lead for the product. You could have the administrative or technical or sales and account roles, and they all are very different. And that's when you start thinking about AI. It is more than just you're just a user. It depends on the context of its use inside the business. Now, when AI first came out, we have people going out and just generally hobbyists, if you want to call it that, trying to understand what is this wonderful product can actually do? What are the boundaries? What value does it actually give to me? And for the most part, people were AI users. Now there's a commercial use for it in the business, and we have got products that you can now buy that are either integrated into your product now, because AI as a function is integrated into it, or you can actually buy it as a specific service. And that's why I find interesting is when you start thinking, I'm no longer an AI user. If you then start buying a product, you've gone from being an AI user to now being an AI customer, because you've now bought into a product that you're sort of dependent on somebody else giving you that service. That role changes how and the context of how you should actually think about the use of AI in your firm. If, and I'll take this to another level, you decide to use that AI service to start doing some form of analytics, writing an email, or actually doing some analysis either on customer data or digits at its most basic sense, you are now imposing customers to become AI data subjects. And now you've now got a responsibility not as a user or as a customer, you now have a responsibility to actually protect your own customers because you are using AI for the delivery of your service. And I think some people haven't really been able to understand that there are so many different layers to this. So I'm going to pause for a second now. And have you ever come across this kind of approach? And what's your general thought to actually how you actually frame that role towards the use of AI?
Yeah, so I can tell you from my experience, I've been doing over the last year a lot of presentations for CPA groups on generative AI, and never really framed it in that perspective of having different roles in the use of it. And what we talk about quite regularly is most of the practitioners that will attend my sessions want to try it for free. And then they may or may not see enough value to then go to the next level of user, as you explained, where they're a customer now because they're paying the subscription fee. And I always ask a poll question. I do an online poll question when I do the presentations, Luke. And so just this last week, I was actually in Washington, D.C., speaking at AICPA had a tax conference. And I did a session on using generative AI in your tax practice. And there were probably, I don't know, 200-300 people in the room. And so I asked them, I always ask the question, are you using, ChatGPT? What's your experience with it? Or generative AI, but ChatGPT is the poster child, of course, for the most part. And so usually it's like 70%, 60 to 70% just have heard about it, right? Haven't even used it. And then you get about 30% to say, yeah, I've been kind of experimenting with it, playing with it. And then you might get 5 to 10%. We're using it, with some actual applications in our in our practice. So that's kind of the way I look about to see kind of where they are on the timeline of actually involving it in their day-to-day work. And so most of them, the vast majority, are still just learning about it and experimenting with it.
Yeah, I think one of the complexities with the legislation that particularly accountants have to adhere to, and again, it's easy to go back to the FTC safeguards rule because it's at the top of everyone's minds, hopefully at the moment, and they call out very specifically. You need to know who your suppliers are. Now, whether you're actually using ChatGPT or you're actually using another commercial service, whether it's free or whether it's actually in a commercial contract, you have got a supplier there. And so if you're using that as part of your business in operations, whether it just be something as generating an email to or a newsletter out to your customers, or using it for some level of analysis, that becomes a part of your supply network. And now you have to start thinking about, well, what's my relationship with them? What are my expectations of that supplier? How do I know that they're going to make sure that all of the security controls are in place? How do I know that the access controls are in place? How do I know that the data that I'm going to be putting into that model or into that platform is going to be secure at a standard that helps me make sure I've got the assurances that I need, but it means that I'm also compliant with legislation such as the FTC safeguards rule. And you can see that it does become a layered thing very, very quickly. But again, these are just these a lot of the roles that I'm telling you now are based off a new ISO standard, which is very, very new. It's only just come out this year that very few firms globally have actually got, but it does give you an amazing framework to actually contextualize why AI should be thought about in a bigger sense than just I'm using it just for fun or just for efficiency purposes.
Yeah, and then you talk about the level at which you become a subject. So I'm interested in learning more about that. So, you know, there's obviously lots of applications for generative AI. So I can use it to help me compose an email, and I always see that as much lower risk than using it to, say, analyze an Excel spreadsheet and coming up with now facts and figures and handing that off to my client and saying, okay, here's some facts and figures. How do I get assurance on my end that those facts and figures are in fact legitimate or accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. AI is not 100% accurate. You have to do some level of validation to make sure that the output is exactly as you would expect it to see. And even from a transparency point, I think we're starting to see a global trend where a lot of firms are becoming a bit more open about the products that they're using. Let's use the White House as an example. In the Biden administration last year, in their cybersecurity strategy, they said very explicitly, you need to know what your suppliers are in your supply chain. Now, as a customer or a client of a firm, you are rightly entitled to asking, who is it you're using in your tech stack and how is it you're using? And then you now have to ask the question, should firms be disclosing that they're actually using AI in the delivery of that service? Um, and to what end? Because that then creates a challenge of like, okay, I've actually got some responsibilities to my customers here. They are the ones that actually hold the power for in a lot of different ways, particularly look at data protection legislation, state by state or incoming federal legislation. You have some responsibilities to the AI subjects or your customers.
Yeah, it's it, boy. As you're talking, I'm thinking of all these questions I have for you as someone who uses the technology myself. Now, when I try to explain how like OpenAI creates their LLM and they have all these sources to create the data set, my understanding is they have sources, but they don't disclose who some of those sources are. And I believe this is where the legislation is going to go to say like, yeah, we have a relationship with, name your information source to be able to use their data. Is that something we should be concerned about as users or?
It is a good question because it goes a lot deeper than that, and it depends on the type of language model you're using. So let's talk about Claude or ChatGPT. They don't natively disclose the source, whereas something like Perplexity AI, automatically comes out with the source. If you ask it a question on I don't know, when is Thanksgiving's Day, this for example, and what should I do to cook a meal for Thanksgiving Day, it will come back with a response. But in its response, it'll actually give you a footnote of where that information's come from. So it's actually disclosing, and I think Perplexity is a lot better for research in that regard. And
Okay.
different LLMs have got different functions. Now, ChatGPT is great as a general use platform. Claude, fantastic for writing and being a little bit more creative. Perplexity is amazing for research, and you can actually layer the three to get an output. Um, in terms of the data, now data is like gold. There are so many firms out there that actively buy and hoover up data and then they sell it to other companies. And that's because when you go onto a website, you'll get a banner that says, "Are you okay with these terms and conditions?" And you never really read them. But if you look in those details, they'll probably say, "Are you okay with us selling your data?" And you've probably accepted it at some point before this came a thing. Your data's now gone to a firm that actually is in the business of buying and selling data. That data model, those databases are now being pushed into the AI. So whether you realize it or not, your data is going to already have been hoovered up probably at some point.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
that brings up an interesting question then, as far as client data, and if an accountant's using some platform with AI and they're ticking a box to say, yes, I accept all the terms and conditions, are they really like selling their client data potentially?
Selling it, no. Disclosing it, potentially, yes.
Yeah.
There aren't actually any scenarios at the moment where I would be using a public LLM or platform and putting any names or anything sensitive in there whatsoever. None. You can actually have your own internally hosted chat GPT now. You can actually build it inside, but it's
Yeah.
built specifically on pulling data from your own repositories. I'll use SharePoint as an example. If you've got an Excel spreadsheet with all your customer details, you can point that chat GPT and say, "That's the source of my material here." So you know it's coming from only a specific repository. But yeah, that's bad practice at the moment. I
Well,
just think it's fraught with so many dangers.
yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about accounting technology, for example. So if you are using a solution that has AI in it potentially, so there, I just don't know if there's any crossover there where there's any like potential risk.
No, I think for the most part, AI is trying to be quite clear. As if you're going to be integrating an AI function or module into an existing platform, they tend to tell you how the data is going to be used and processed and stored
Mhm.
invariably. And typically, it's going to be stored in the US, and it will be telling you quite clearly about how that data is going to be used. For the most part, it's for efficiency purposes. If you decide to use it other than that, that becomes your problem, not the AI's problem.
Mhm.
Really your responsibilities can't be overlooked here. Um, have you
Mhm.
come across a model or a frame of a reference called the shared responsibility model
Mhm.
before?
Yeah.
That's something that gets overlooked. Now, the shared responsibility model is exactly that. You, as a consumer, have a responsibility. If you're using a platform, that has a responsibility. So, AWS are responsible for the infrastructure and the delivery of service to store your data in it. They're responsible for the data centers, the technology, and the security protocols on their end. If you're
Mhm.
storing your data in AWS, your responsibility is that you're putting the data there. You're making sure that you've got multi-factor authentication enabled. You're making sure that only the right people can access the data at the right time and for the right reasons. Shared responsibilities. And that's exactly the same thing when using AI. You've got responsibilities, as have the actual supplier of that service.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was going to kind of ask the question, and I think you just answered a part of it, is that so many of the CPA practitioners have moved all of their applications to the cloud, for accounting, for tax, et cetera. And so obviously they're putting client data in their server infrastructures. So are there additional risks with AI? I kind of, on one hand, I say, well, AI is the same thing, right? You're using a third party, as you've said, and you're working with client data. So if I feel I've got the right framework for managing the security or confidentiality of my client data using those other services, what are some of the other things I need to be concerned about specific to AI? Or should I just, am I comfortable to follow the same kind of path with AI as those other apps?
I think it is a good question. It's also a tricky one to answer. I think I would take another step back and go back to the information security program and look at some very specific things you need to apply to data and storage as a whole. And access controls it's enormous, and that simply means you're giving people or businesses or entities access that is commensurate with the role they need.
Uh-huh.
So, Gaynor, you're going to invite me to look at one of your documents. You might simply say, yeah, I'm going to go to my Google Drive. I'm going to allow you to view it, not edit or download it. And that's a simple, basic form of access control. When you're using AI, you also need to look at the level of access control it can have. So if it's a module, it's like an application rather than a human, but that application's got access into your repository, you need to be understanding what is it it's going to be able to access, what is it it can see, what is it can do with that data. Now, you might say, well, it's going to access a spreadsheet, but it's only going to access columns B, C, and D. You've got columns A to K that are available. As long as you're very clear about what it's accessing within that repository or that sphere or in that environment and what it's going to do, I think you're doing the best you can. Look, there's nothing foolproof in security. That's an absolute fact. A lot of the time, it's a best endeavor, and if you're doing the best you can with the knowledge and the resources you've got, then for the most part, that is great because there is no such thing as 100% security, and there may or may not be something where we talk about what level of security is a good measure, a good sweet spot to work for. So yeah, access control is one thing. Data backup is also another one. I'd also be very mindful about where that data is actually stored, how long it's stored for. Can you actually delete your data? If you're putting customer data into an LLM, can you go to ChatGPT and say, date, time, I put that in there. Can you please delete it? You might find
Mhm.
that the answer is no.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. But that's, that's actually a really good point as well. And maybe that's where we'll break on this topic too, unless there's like any other like big takeaways. I know Luke is like just like burning to get all this like knowledge out there because it's so valuable because it's things that we don't think about every day. But I love the analogy of you have to think about your apps just like a user to your data, right? It's just like having a team member. You're not just going to let somebody have unfettered access to everything. You've got to
Yeah.
think about that from the app perspective too.
Oh, 100%. So APIs, if you've come across an API where it's like an application programming interface, you're effectively saying we've got two applications and we want them to be able to speak together. If you look in
Right.
the accounting sector, you can pick a number of document management systems that work and play well with each other. They've invariably got an API. That API has to be treated as an identity, and that identity has to have roles and permissions in terms of what it can actually do. So when we talk about entities, it's no longer just about a human. We're also talking about access and applications and partners and products.
Yeah.
It is much broader than just simple
Yeah.
human access.
Siri, please leave my data alone. Right? She's not gonna do that. Right.
Ask the question. Ask Siri now, can you please delete my conversations and see what response you get?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll try
definitely.
that. Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out the fact that, what Luke does and what iComply does is they provide that resource for firms, so small practitioners, small firms like myself, that, we know we've got these risks. We know enough to think about the things we should be worried about, but then we don't know how to go about dealing with them. And just like if you're a tax practitioner, your clients come to you to do their taxes, not so much because they want you to do the taxes, but because they trust you, that you know the things you need to know to protect them, to make sure the IRS isn't going to come and hit them with a big fine or whatever. And so I think that's something that for our audience needs to be understanding, that you should understand more about what iComply can do to be that resource for you to give you peace of mind.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah, I just want to latch onto a term you said there, trust. Now, you're familiar with the term Net Promoter Score, which
Mhm.
is, typically how to measure about where you're performing. Digital trust is going to become another measurement of
Yeah.
how well are you actually performing. And digital trust, if you are connected to the internet and you are using technology and you're in the accounting space, you are responsible for digital trust. And customers look at, are you digital trustworthy? And that means showing that you're doing things like compliance and you have got an information security program. You are assessing your third party suppliers. That digital trust is quite a big passport to saying, you know what, you can work with me. I know what I'm doing. I'm okay.
Yeah, that's very important for sure.
Maybe there should be a DTS, a digital trust score.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, they have actually indicated at some point Net Promoter Score may actually be phased out in favor of something like a digital
Yeah,
trust score. I'm not sure
it's,
there actually exists such a thing, but it is actually a measurable thing.
yeah, it's I tell you, it's a way of the world, and especially I think with the younger business owners as well, they're coming to expect a level of data security just like an Amazon or anything else would provide.
We're in an interesting period now, and I put myself in that period where I was around when the internet was created. When I created, it was actually became a thing, and so I've obviously grown up with it rather than growing into it. So I've seen its evolution come along, and if you look at my standards of when I was first using it compared to the people of today, their standards are significantly higher than what we have probably ever had in our past. And security is one aspect. It's the data privacy piece, which is the thing that overwhelmingly bothered about. Not so much the security is about what's the level of intrusion that the technology's got around my data, but
Right.
Yeah,
insecurity and privacy are inherently related,
yeah,
but different.
very true. All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, Luke. I think
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's just like eye-opening and not always in a good way. It's a good way, but it's like, wow, the things that we don't know that can potentially hurt us or our clients are, it's massive.
If
So
I'm going
definitely,
to leave anything, Donald Rumsfeld. We talked about three things: known knowns, known unknowns, and
yeah,
unknown unknowns.
that's
Yeah.
And
right.
you have to work out where exactly you are on a specific topic. But I think that was so incredibly apt, and it still remains very relevant today.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
definitely. Well, thank you, Luke, and we appreciate you coming on. I think you're not only moving the needle, you're like putting the needle in a whole different territory today. So,
No, thank you very much. It's been a good chat.
Yes.
yeah,
Thanks for joining us, Luke.
Cheers.
thank you.